The silence in the room wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Harrison West thought he had the perfect life. A multi-million-dollar architecture firm, a beautiful wife at home, and a passionate, secret life in the city. He thought he was the player moving pieces on a board only he could see. But when he woke up that Tuesday morning, the bed was cold. His mistress was gone. And on the nightstand, where her phone should have been, sat two objects that made his blood freeze: a pair of diamond earrings he hadn't bought for her, and a note that didn't just say goodbye. It said, "Game over." Harrison was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. You never truly know who is sleeping beside you. The morning sun sliced through the gaps in the velvet curtains of the mesmerizing high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago, hitting Harrison West directly in the eyes. He groaned, rolling over his arm, instinctively reaching out to drape over the warm curve of Sienna's waist. His hand hit the mattress. Cold, flat, empty. Harrison blinked, the fog of expensive scotch and exhaustion slowly lifting. He sat up, rubbing his temples. The room was aggressively silent. Usually Sienna was a morning creature, humming while she made espresso, the smell of burnt toast and expensive vanilla perfume filling the air. But today the air smelled sterile. It smelled like a hotel room that had already been cleaned. "Sienna," he croaked, his voice rough. No answer. He swung his legs out of bed. He wasn't panicked yet, just annoyed. He had a 10 a.m. meeting with the zoning board for the new Skyline project, and he needed his coffee. He walked into the living room, naked, expecting to see her curled up on the beige sofa, scrolling through Instagram. The living room was pristine, too pristine. The throw pillows were karate chopped perfectly. The coffee table, usually littered with her fashion magazines and wine glasses, was bare. Harrison frowned. He walked to the kitchen. The espresso machine was cold. "Sienna, stop playing games. I have to leave in 30. He called out, irritation creeping into his tone. He hated when she got clingy or dramatic. He paid for this apartment, specifically so he wouldn't have to deal with drama. He went back to the bedroom to find his phone. That's when he saw it. On the dark mahogany nightstand, sitting precisely in the center of the coaster, was a pair of earrings. Harrison froze. He took a step closer, his breath catching in his throat. They were teardrop diamonds, set in vintage platinum, with a very specific tiny sapphire embedded in the clasp. These weren't just any earrings. These weren't a gift he had bought for Sienna. He hadn't bought jewelry for Sienna in months. These were the St. Clair diamonds. They belonged to his wife, Lorelei. His stomach dropped as if he were in a plummeting elevator. He vividly remembered the night he gave them to Lorelei for their 10th anniversary, 3 years ago. She had worn them to the gala, then put them in the wall safe behind the painting in his study, a safe only he and Lorelei knew the combination to. How in God's name were they sitting on the nightstand of his mistress's apartment, 10 miles away from his marital home? His hands were trembling as he reached for them. Next to the earrings was a piece of heavy cream-colored cardstock. It wasn't a sticky note. It was fancy stationery. He picked it up. The handwriting wasn't Sienna's looping, bubbly script. It was sharp, angular, and familiar. "She has exquisite taste, Harrison. Better than yours. But honestly, they look better on me. I'm keeping the rest. Goodbye." There was no signature. "What the hell?" Harrison whispered. He ripped open the closet door. Empty. Not just empty of clothes, the hangers were gone. He ran to the bathroom. The toothbrushes, the shampoos, the makeup all gone. It was as if Sienna Brooks had never existed. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced his narcissism. He grabbed his phone to call her. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He tried again. Same result. He pulled up his banking app. He needed to check the account he used to pay the rent for this place. He logged in. Access denied. Contact your branch administrator. Harrison stared at the screen. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his back. This wasn't a breakup. This was a demolition. He scrambled to get dressed, pulling on his suit from the night before. He checked his pockets. His wallet was there. His keys were there. But his wedding ring... He looked at the nightstand again. His wedding ring, which he always took off and placed in the drawer when he was with Sienna, was missing. He tore the drawer out. Nothing. He was standing in an empty apartment, holding his wife's stolen diamonds, with no mistress, no wedding ring, and a frozen bank account. Harrison West didn't know it yet, but his life had ended the moment he walked into this apartment last night. Now he was just living through the autopsy. The drive from the city to the affluent suburb of Lake Forest usually took 40 minutes. Harrison made it in 25. His hands gripped the leather steering wheel of his Audi so tightly his knuckles were white. His mind was racing, trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Scenario A. Sienna broke into his house, stole the earrings and left them to blackmail him. Scenario B. Lorelei found out, hired someone to steal them and planted them. No, that was insane. Lorelei was passive. She was the country club wife, personified, charitable quiet, obsessed with her hydrangeas. She didn't have the grit for a setup like this. It had to be Sienna. Sienna was younger, hungrier. She must have swiped the combination from him when he was drunk, or maybe he wrote it down somewhere. Yes, that had to be it. Sienna was trying to extort him. He pulled into the driveway of his sprawling colonial estate. The house looked terrifyingly normal. The landscaping crew was blowing leaves off the lawn. Lorelei's white Range Rover was parked in its usual spot. Harrison checked his reflection in the rear-view mirror. He looked haggard. He rubbed his face, composing himself. He had to play this cool. He would walk in, go straight to the safe, verify the theft, and then call the police. No, he couldn't call the police. He couldn't explain why the earrings were in an apartment registered to a shell company he owned. He would have to handle this privately. He unlocked the front door. Lorelei. The smell of cinnamon and roasted chicken wafted through the hallway. It was nauseatingly domestic. "In the kitchen, darling." Her voice was light, airy. Normal. Harrison walked into the kitchen. Lorelei was standing by the island arranging flowers. She looked impeccable in a cream cashmere sweater and jeans. She didn't look like a woman who had just orchestrated a psychological hit on her husband. She looked like a woman preparing for a luncheon. "You're home early," she said, smiling. She didn't look at his eyes. She focused on the flowers. "I thought you had that zoning meeting." I wasn't feeling well," Harrison lied, leaning against the doorframe, trying to hide the pocket where the diamond earrings burned against his thigh. "I cancelled it." "Oh, poor thing," Lorelei said, snipping a stem of a white rose. "You do look pale." "Late night at the office?" Harrison watched her closely. Was there a twitch, a smirk? Nothing. Just practiced serenity. "Yeah. Late night." He cleared his throat. "Lorelei, have you been in the study lately?" She paused, the shears hovering over a bloom. She turned to look at him, her blue eyes wet and innocent. "The study?" "No. I haven't been in there since you yelled at the maid for dusting your desk last month." "Why, just checking something," he mumbled. "I'm going to go lie down." "Okay, Dinner is at 6. My mother is coming over. Harrison froze. Her mother. Constance. The only woman on earth more terrifying than a scorned wife. Right. Great. He bolted up the stairs and into his study. He locked the door behind him. He went straight to the large oil painting of the marina that hung behind his desk. He swung it open. The safe. His fingers punched in the code 042905. Their wedding date. The light turned green. The mechanism clicked. He pulled the heavy door open. Harrison gasped, his knees actually buckling. He had to grab the desk chair to stop from falling. The safe wasn't empty. It was full. The stacks of cash he kept for emergencies, gone. The bearer bonds gone. His collection of vintage watches, gone. The velvet box that held the St. Clair earrings. It was there. He grabbed the velvet box and snapped it open. It was empty. But in the place where the earrings should have been, there was a Polaroid photo. Harrison picked it up with trembling fingers. It was a picture of him, sleeping, naked, in the apartment in the city. But it wasn't taken from the perspective of someone lying next to him. It was taken from the doorway, and in the foreground of the photo, holding up a middle finger to the camera, was a hand wearing a distinctive ring. It wasn't Sienna's hand. Sienna had a small tattoo on her wrist. This wrist was clean. And the ring? The ring was a heavy gold signet ring with a family crest. Harrison recognized the ring immediately. It belonged to his brother-in-law, Lorelei's brother, the one who had died in a boating accident 5 years ago. Harrison dropped the photo. "Impossible," he whispered. "Julian is dead. I identified the body." The phone in his pocket buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. "Did you enjoy the ghost story, Harry? We're just getting started. Check your email." Harrison ignored the urge to vomit. He sat in his leather executive chair and woke his laptop. His screensaver was a picture of him and Lorelei in Cabo. It mocked him now. He opened his personal email. There was one new message at the top, flagged as high priority. Subject: your resignation. From Human Resources Board of Directors. Harrison frowned. He clicked it. "Dear Mr. West, effective immediately, the board has voted to suspend your access to all company infrastructure pending an internal investigation regarding the misappropriation of funds and violation of the Ethics Code. Please see the attached documentation regarding the transfer of $4.5 million from the firm's operating account to a private holding company registered in your name, Sienna Holdings, LLC. Security will escort you from the premises if you attempt to enter the building." "No," Harrison shouted at the empty room. "No, I didn't transfer that money." He had set up Sienna Holdings to pay for the apartment. Yes, but he only put $5,000 a month in there. He never moved millions. Someone had framed him. Someone had used his secret shell company to drain his own firm, making it look like he was embezzling. He clicked the attachment. It was a PDF of bank transfers. They were dated yesterday, the exact time he was passed out drunk in apartment 4B. He grabbed his phone to call his lawyer, Saul. "Saul, you need to listen to me," Harrison barked as soon as the line connected. "Harrison." Saul's voice was cold, distant. "I can't talk to you." "What do you mean you can't talk to me? You're my attorney." "Not anymore. I represent the firm, Harrison. And frankly, after what Lorelei showed me this morning, I can't believe I ever shook your hand." "Lorelei! What did she show you?" Harrison screamed. "The video, Harrison. The video of you and that girl, discussing how you were going to liquidate the firm's assets and run away to the Caymans. It's damning. The audio is crystal clear." "I never said that," Harrison roared. "I never said I was going to run away." "Save it for the judge. Don't call me again." Click. Harrison stared at the phone. He had never said those things. He and Sienna talked about sex, about wine, about travel. They never talked about embezzlement. Deepfakes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Someone had recorded him probably for months and used AI to alter the conversation. They had built a perfect trap. He stood up, pacing the room. He was trapped in his own house. His wife downstairs was acting like nothing was wrong while upstairs his career was burning to the ground. He needed to find Sienna. She was the key. She must have been planted. If he could find her, force her to confess that she was hired to frame him, he could prove his innocence. He needed a professional. He couldn't use his usual security guys, they worked for the firm. He needed someone off the grid. He unlocked a drawer in his desk, the only one that didn't have a safe in it, and pulled out an old business card. Tobias Reed. Private investigations. We find what doesn't want to be found. He dialed the number. "Reed," a gravelly voice answered. "Tobias, it's Harrison West. I need you. Now." Harrison West. Tobias paused. "The architect, I saw you on the news 10 minutes ago." "The news?" Harrison's heart stopped. "Yeah. Channel 5. Police just issued a warrant for your arrest. Corporate fraud and... hang on. Suspicion of involvement in the disappearance of a woman named Sienna Brooks." Harrison dropped the phone. Disappearance. He wasn't just being framed for embezzlement. He was being framed for murder. He looked out the window. At the end of his long driveway, blue and red lights were flashing silently against the trees. They were here. Harrison looked at the safe, then at the door. He had seconds. He grabbed the diamond earrings from the desk, shoved them into his pocket, and ran to the window. There was a trellis that led down to the garden. He hadn't climbed it since he was sneaking out as a teenager, but he had no choice. As he threw his leg over the sill, the door to his study burst open. It wasn't the police. It was Lorelei. She stood there, still holding the garden shears. She looked at him half out the window, looking guilty as sin. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled. A slow, terrifying curve of her lips. "Running so soon, darling?" she asked softly. "But you haven't even found the body yet." Harrison didn't wait. He scrambled down the trellis, the thorns of the climbing roses tearing at his suit and his hands. He hit the grass and sprinted toward the woods that bordered his estate, the sound of sirens growing louder behind him. He was a fugitive now, and his wife was the devil. The woods bordering the West Estate were not a sanctuary. They were a cage of thorns and freezing mud. Harrison West, a man who hadn't walked on an unpaved surface in a decade without golf spikes, was now scrambling on his hands and knees through a dense thicket of brambles. His bespoke Italian suit, worth $4,000, snagged on a hawthorn branch. He yanked it free, hearing the sickening sound of fine wool tearing. He didn't care. The blue and red strobe of police lights pierced the canopy of trees behind him, sweeping back and forth like the eyes of a predator. He could hear the dogs now, the baying of K9 units. "Think, Harrison, think." He panted, his breath pluming in the cold October air. He knew this terrain, or at least he knew the architectural survey of it. He had commissioned a topographical map of the entire 10-acre property when he bought it. He knew there was a drainage culvert about 300 yards east, a concrete tunnel that ran under the highway and dumped out near the old industrial park in North Chicago. He pushed himself up his loafers, slipping on the wet leaves, and sprinted. 20 minutes later, Harrison West emerged on the other side of Highway 41. He was covered in slime, shivering violently, and smelled like stagnant water. He slid down the concrete embankment and huddled under the overpass. The roar of semi-trucks thundering overhead was deafening, but it masked the sound of his ragged breathing. He checked his pockets. One cell phone, dead battery, thank God, or they would have tracked him. One wallet, credit cards frozen, maybe $200 in cash. One velvet box containing the fake St. Clair diamond earrings. He needed a phone. He needed a roof. And most of all, he needed to know why his dead brother-in-law was sending him photos from the grave. He limped toward the glowing sign of a gas station in the distance. He kept his head down, pulling his suit jacket collar up. He bought a prepaid burner phone and a bottle of water with cash, avoiding the clerk's suspicious gaze. He went around the back of the station near the dumpster and dialed the number on the business card he had memorized. "Reed," the voice rasped. "It's me," Harrison whispered. "I'm out. I'm at the Shell station off the 41 interchange. I need you to pick me up. Now. You're hot west. Every cop in Illinois is looking for your car." "I don't have the car. I'm on foot. And I didn't kill her, Tobias. You have to believe me." There was a long pause, the sound of a lighter flicking on the other end. "I believe you. Mostly because a guy who kills his mistress usually has an exit plan better than a drainage ditch. Sit tight. I'm in a gray Corolla. 10 minutes. Tobias Reed wasn't what Harrison expected. He looked more like a retired boxer than a detective, thick neck, a nose that had been broken twice, and weary eyes that had seen too much of Chicago's underbelly. He drove Harrison to a safe house in Waukegan, a run-down motel called the Sleepy Sailor that rented rooms by the hour. The wallpaper was peeling, and the carpet was sticky, but it had a heavy deadbolt. Harrison stripped off his ruined suit and took a shower that scalded his skin red. When he came out, wrapping a thin, rough towel around his waist, Tobias was sitting at the small, round table, examining the diamond earrings under a jeweler's loop. "Well?" Harrison asked, sitting on the edge of the sagging bed. "Paste," Tobias grunted, tossing the earrings onto the table. "Good quality cubic zirconia. The setting is platinum, but the stone's worthless. You were right. Your wife kept the real ones." Harrison put his head in his hands. "She planned this. She planned every second of it. She waited until the firm had the liquidity for the Skyline project, then drained the accounts using my credentials. She set up the apartment. She probably hired Sienna." "Speaking of Sienna," Tobias said, pulling a file folder out of his leather jacket, "I did some digging while you were playing commando in the woods. There is no Sienna Brooks." Harrison looked up. "What?" "The Social Security number on her rental application belongs to a woman who died in 1998. Her college transcripts forged. Sienna Brooks is a ghost." Tobias tossed a glossy 8x10 photo onto the table. "But face recognition software is a beautiful thing. Meet Natalie Vane." Harrison stared at the photo. It was Sienna, but she looked different, harder. She wasn't wearing the designer clothes he bought her. She was wearing a leather jacket and smoking a cigarette, leaning against a motorcycle. Natalie Vane, Tobias continued lighting a cigarette of his own, despite the no smoking sign. Actress, small-time stuff, commercials, extra work. But here's the kicker: she did 2 years in verified juvenile detention for fraud. She's a grifter, Harrison, a pro. Lorelei hired an actress, Harrison whispered, the horror sinking in. to play the part of my mistress. And to play the part of the murder victim, Tobias added. The police found 3 pints of blood in that apartment kitchen an hour ago. Matches Natalie's blood type, but no body. 3 pints that's survivable but messy. Or, Tobias leaned in his eyes, gleaming, it's a stash from a blood bank splashed around to look like a slaughter. If there's no body, Harrison, there's no murder. But they don't need a body to charge you. They have the motive, the money, and the missing girl. Harrison stood up and paced the small room. We have to find her. If Natalie Vane is alive, she's the only one who can clear my name. She must have been paid off. She's probably halfway to Mexico. Maybe, Tobias said. But grifters get greedy. And if she's working with Lorelei, well, Lorelei isn't the type to leave loose ends. If I were Natalie, I wouldn't go to Mexico. I'd go to insurance. Insurance. Leverage. Proof. She wouldn't just take the money and run. She'd keep something to ensure Lorelei keeps paying. And I think I know where she might be. Where? Tobias tapped the photo. In the background. See that sign? Harrison squinted. Behind Natalie and the motorcycle there was a blurred neon sign. The Rusty Anchor. That's a biker bar down by the Navy Pier. It's where Julian St. Clair used to move product before he went legit. And then died, Tobias said. If Natalie is connected to Julian, and Julian is connected to Lorelei, that bar is the nexus. Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold shower. Julian, the photo in the safe, the ring. Exactly. Tobias stood up. Get dressed, Harrison. I bought you some clothes from Walmart. You look like a suburban dad on a fishing trip, but it's better than the suit. We're going to the Rusty Anchor. We're going to a biker bar. Harrison looked at the plaid shirt and jeans Tobias had thrown on the bed. I'm an architect, Tobias. I build museums. I don't fight bikers. Tobias smirked, checking the chamber of his snub-nosed revolver. Tonight you're not an architect, Harry. Tonight you're a man who lost everything. And that makes you the most dangerous person in the room. Let's go hunting. The Rusty Anchor smelled of stale beer sawdust and bad decisions. It was located in a warehouse district that the city's gentrification efforts hadn't touched yet. The music was loud, a thumping bass that rattled the teeth, and the lighting was practically non-existent. Harrison felt painfully conspicuous in his stiff new jeans and flannel shirt. He pulled a baseball cap lower over his eyes. His face was plastered on every news station in Chicago, but in the dim red light of the bar, he was just another shadow. Tobias moved through the crowd with the ease of a shark in water. He led Harrison to a back booth far from the entrance. Don't talk, Tobias warned. Let me handle the locals. Harrison scanned the room. It was filled with rough men in leather vests and women who looked tired. He searched for Natalie's face or Sienna's face, but saw no one who resembled his missing mistress. Suddenly, a massive man with a beard like steel wool slammed a pitcher of beer onto their table. You the guy asking about Julian? The man grunted, staring at Tobias. Tobias didn't flinch. Depends. You the guy who knows where he is? The man laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Julian St. Clair is fish food, pal. Died 5 years ago. Capsized off the Cape. Yeah, I read the obituary, Tobias said, calmly, sliding a folded $100 bill across the sticky table. But ghost stories are expensive, and I hear Julian's ghost has been seen around here, specifically wearing a gold signet ring. The man looked at the money, then at Harrison. He narrowed his eyes. You look familiar. Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs. I just have one of those faces. The man sneered. He swiped the bill. Go down to the docks. Warehouse 17, the one with the condemned sign. If you see a light in the loft, tell the ghost Big Mike says hello." The rain had started again by the time they reached Warehouse 17. It was a looming skeletal structure of brick and broken glass, sitting right on the edge of the dark, churning water of Lake Michigan. "Stay behind me," Tobias whispered, drawing his gun. They slipped through a rusted side door. The inside of the warehouse was cavernous, filled with old shipping crates and rotting pallets. But in the center of the vast space, there was a freight elevator, and the indicator light was on. "Top floor," Tobias signaled. They took the stairs, moving silently up the metal grate steps. Harrison's legs burned. He was exhausted, hungry, and terrified, but a cold rage was beginning to crystallize in his chest. Lorelei, Julian. They had played him for a fool. They had laughed at him while he built his empire, waiting for the perfect moment to snatch it away. When they reached the top landing, they saw it. A luxury apartment built inside the shell of the industrial ruin. Glass walls, modern furniture, soft lighting. It was a fortress of wealth, hidden in a graveyard of industry. And sitting on a leather couch, swirling a glass of amber liquid, was a man Harrison hadn't seen in 5 years. Julian St. Clair. He looked older, his face gaunt, his hair thinning, but the arrogant set of his jaw was unmistakable. He was wearing a silk robe, and on his finger the gold ring glinted. "I wondered how long it would take you," Julian called out, not even looking toward the door where Harrison and Tobias stood. "You were always tenacious, Harrison. It's the only quality I admired in you." Harrison stepped into the light, pushing past Tobias. "You're supposed to be dead." Julian turned, smiling. It was a shark's smile. "And you're supposed to be in police custody." Disappointing, really. Lorelei had the timeline perfectly orchestrated. "Where is she?" Harrison demanded, stepping closer. "Where is Natalie?" "Natalie." Julian chuckled. "Oh, you mean the help. She's around. She's indisposed." "Why?" Harrison screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Why do this? I made you money. I took care of Lorelei." Julian stood up, his expression hardening. "You stole our company, Harrison. You convinced my father that I was incompetent, that I was a liability because of my habits. You pushed me out, took the CEO chair, and turned St. Clair Architecture into West and Associates. You erased our name." "Your father fired you because you were embezzling," Harrison shouted back. "I saved the firm. You stole my birthright," Julian roared, throwing his glass against the wall. It shattered, raining shards onto the polished concrete. "So we took it back, all of it. The money you thought was yours, it's ours now. The reputation you built, gone. You're going to prison for the murder of a girl who never existed, and I'm going to disappear again with $5 million of your cash." "Not if I turn you in," Harrison said, clenching his fists. "I have a witness." He gestured to Tobias. Julian looked at Tobias and laughed. "The PI, please. Do you really think you hired him by accident?" "Harrison?" Harrison froze. He looked back at Tobias. Tobias Reed wasn't pointing his gun at Julian. He was pointing it at Harrison. "Sorry, Harry," Tobias said, his voice flat, devoid of the grit from earlier. "But the St. Clair family pays a lot better than you do, and my retainer fee, well, it's astronomical." Harrison felt the blood drain from his face. The business card in his desk, the one he had found in the back of the drawer. Who had put it there? Lorelei. It was all a setup. The escape, the safe house, the lead to the bar. It was all designed to bring him here. "Why bring me here?" Harrison asked, his voice trembling. "Why not just let the police catch me?" "Because," a female voice said from the shadows of the bedroom doorway. Harrison turned. Lorelei walked out. She was wearing a trench coat and gloves. She held a pistol with a silencer attached. "Because the police might miss something," Lorelei said softly. "And we need to make sure the suicide note is convincing." Harrison looked around. He was trapped. Julian on one side, Tobias with a gun behind him, and his wife, his beautiful, deadly wife, blocking the exit. "Suicide," Harrison choked out. "Of course," Lorelei said, walking over to Julian and kissing him on the cheek, a gesture far too intimate for siblings. Guilt-ridden over killing his mistress, the disgraced architect Harrison West tracks down her body to the warehouse where he hid it, sets the building on fire, and takes his own life. A tragic end. "And Natalie?" Harrison asked, playing for time. "Where does she fit in? Oh, sweetie." Lorelei smiled, raising the gun. "Natalie is already in the trunk of your car downstairs, or what's left of her. We really did need a body, you see." Harrison looked at Tobias. "You're going to let them kill me?" Tobias shrugged. "I'm just the driver, kid. Nothing personal." Harrison's mind raced. He was 3 feet from the glass coffee table, 5 feet from Julian, 10 feet from Lorelei. "One last request," Harrison said, his voice surprisingly steady. "Make it quick," Julian sneered. "I want to know." Harrison looked at Lorelei. "Did you ever love me? Or was the last 10 years just a long con?" Lorelei paused. Her eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened into ice. "I loved the lifestyle, Harrison. But you were just the man who kept the seat warm for my brother." Harrison nodded. "Okay, that's all I needed." He didn't lunge for the gun. He didn't lunge for Lorelei. Harrison West, the man who knew the structural integrity of every material on Earth, lunged for the support column next to Julian, specifically the exposed gas line valve that ran up the side of the industrial pillar. He grabbed the red wheel and wrenched it open. The hiss of natural gas filled the room instantly. "You shoot me," Harrison yelled, holding up the cheap burner phone he had bought, and the spark from the muzzle flash blows this entire building to hell. We all die. Lorelei froze. Julian took a step back. Tobias lowered his gun slightly, his eyes wide. "He's bluffing," Julian shouted. "Shoot him." "Don't," Tobias yelled. "The mix is too rich. He's right." The room was filled with the smell of rotten eggs. The gas was pumping out at high pressure. "Drop the guns," Harrison screamed, his thumb hovering over the call button on the lit-up screen of the phone. One spark. One static shock. "Drop them." Lorelei looked at Julian. Panic flickered in her eyes. The carefully laid plan had just dissolved into volatile chemistry. "Harrison, wait," Lorelei said, her voice trembling. "We can work this out." "No, we can't," Harrison said, sweat stinging his eyes. "Kick the guns over to me. Now." Tobias, the pragmatist, dropped his revolver and kicked it across the floor. "I'm not dying for this payout." Lorelei hesitated. "Do it, Lorelei!" Julian screamed. She slowly lowered her gun and slid it across the concrete. Harrison swooped down, grabbing Tobias's gun. He didn't aim at them. He aimed at the window, the massive, floor-to-ceiling industrial pane that overlooked the lake. "Game over," Harrison whispered. He fired 2 shots into the glass. The window shattered outward. The rush of wind from the lake swirled into the room, mixing with the gas. Harrison didn't wait to see if the mixture would ignite. He turned and sprinted for the freight elevator shaft, diving not into the car, but onto the greasy cables hanging beside it. He slid down into the darkness, just as he heard Lorelei scream his name. The friction burned through the palms of Harrison's hands, tearing the skin raw as he slid down the greasy elevator cable. The darkness of the shaft was absolute, the only sound the terrifying whir, whir, whir of the cable vibrating against his weight. He prayed the braking mechanism at the bottom hadn't rusted through. His Italian loafers slammed into the top of the elevator car with a bone-jarring thud. He collapsed, gasping for air, the smell of ozone and old grease filling his lungs. He didn't have time to assess his injuries. Above him, 60 feet up, he heard shouting. A gunshot echoed, pinging harmlessly off the metal sides of the shaft. They were coming. Harrison pried open the maintenance hatch of the elevator car and dropped inside. The doors were jammed half open. He squeezed through, tumbling out onto the concrete floor of the ground level. He was in the loading bay. It was dark, silent, and smelled of rot. But there, parked under a flickering halogen bulb, was the car Tobias had mentioned, the grey Corolla. But Harrison didn't run for the driver's seat. He ran to the trunk. Lorelei had said Natalie was in the trunk, or what's left of her. Lorelei was a liar, a manipulator, and a psychopath, but she was also arrogant. She believed she had already won. Would she lie about the body, or was it the ultimate trophy? Harrison's hands were slick with blood and sweat as he fumbled with the latch. It was locked. He looked around wildly. A tire iron lay on a nearby workbench. He grabbed it and jammed it into the seam of the trunk, putting all his adrenaline-fueled weight behind it. Create leverage. Find the fulcrum. It was just architecture. With a screech of tearing metal, the lock popped. Harrison threw the lid up. He expected a corpse. He expected the vacant stare of the woman he had slept with for 6 months. What he found was a woman bound with zip ties, gagged with duct tape curled into a fetal ball, kicking furiously at the spare tire. Natalie Vane was alive. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with terror that instantly shifted to confusion and then to recognition. Harrison ripped the tape off her mouth. "You took your sweet time, Harry," she rasped, coughing violently. "They said you were dead," Harrison said, using the tire iron to twist the zip ties on her wrists until they snapped. "Lorelei said, Lorelei is a bitch," Natalie spat, rubbing her wrists. "She wanted me to suffocate in here while they finished you off upstairs. Loose ends. I was the last one." "Can you run?" Harrison asked, pulling her out of the trunk. "For $5 million, I can fly," she growled. She looked at him, really looked at him, noting the ruined suit, the blood, the soot. "You look like hell, Harrison." "I feel like it. We have to go. They're coming down the stairs." They jumped into the Corolla. Keys were gone. Of course. Tobias wasn't an amateur. "Move," Natalie ordered, shoving Harrison into the passenger seat. She reached under the steering column. "I didn't spend 2 years in juvie learning how to knit." In under 10 seconds, wires were stripped and sparked. The engine roared to life. Natalie slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching on the polished concrete, and spun them around toward the bay doors. "Hang on!" she yelled. She gunned it. The car smashed through the rotting wooden barrier of the loading bay door, splintering wood and sending debris flying. They landed on the wet asphalt of the dockside road, fishtailing wildly before Natalie regained control. Harrison looked back. High up in the warehouse window, he saw a silhouette against the broken glass. A muzzle flash lit up the night. The back window of the Corolla shattered, raining safety glass over them. "Drive!" Harrison screamed. Natalie floored it, the little engine whining in protest as they sped toward the city lights, leaving the darkness of the harbor behind. They drove in silence for 10 minutes, putting distance between themselves and the executioners. Natalie pulled into a 24-hour self-service car wash bay in a rough neighborhood to hide the car from street cameras. She killed the engine and turned to him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, hard reality in the small space. "So," Harrison said, brushing glass off his shoulder. "You're not Sienna Brooks." "No," she said, lighting a cigarette she found in the glove box. Her hands were shaking. "I'm Natalie, and you were the mark. I'm sorry, Harrison. Truly. It was just a job at first." "A job," Harrison repeated, feeling a bitter laugh bubble up. "You slept with me. You whispered in my ear. You made me fall for you. For a paycheck." "A big paycheck," Natalie corrected, exhaling smoke. "Julian found me. I was waiting tables, drowning in debt. He offered me a clean slate. All I had to do was be the perfect mistress. Make you feel like a king, so you wouldn't notice they were stealing your kingdom. And the earrings. Part of the script, Lorelei's idea. She wanted to twist the knife. She hates you, you know. She really, really hates you." "I gathered that," Harrison said dryly. "She blames me for stealing the firm." "No." Natalie turned to him, her expression serious. "She blames you for fixing it. Julian broke it. You fixed it. Every time you succeeded, it reminded them of how useless they were. It wasn't about money, Harrison. It was about envy. Pure rot-gut envy." Harrison looked out at the soapy water dripping down the tiled walls of the car wash. It made sense. The St. Clairs were old money, entitled and fragile. His competence was an insult to their existence. "So what now?" Harrison asked. "We're fugitives. They have the money. They have the police in their pocket." "They don't have all the money," Natalie said, a sly smile creeping onto her face. Harrison frowned. "What do you mean?" "Julian is a paranoid drug addict," Natalie said. "He didn't trust Lorelei, and he certainly didn't trust the offshore banks. He converted about half of the stolen funds, nearly $3 million, into bearer bonds and diamonds. Physical assets. Where are they? He keeps them in a go bag, a specialized fireproof briefcase. He never lets it out of his sight. It was in the apartment upstairs." "We can't go back there," Harrison said. "We don't have to," Natalie said, "because Julian isn't going to stay there. The gas leak. The gunshots. The police will be there in 20 minutes. Julian and Lorelei will run to their secondary extraction point. They have a private plane waiting at the executive airfield in Wheeling." "How do you know that?" "Because I booked the flight," Natalie smirked. "I was the executive assistant. Remember, I know the itinerary. I know the pilot. And I know that the flight is scheduled for 4 a.m. Harrison checked the dashboard clock. 2:15 a.m. "We can beat them there," Harrison said, his mind shifting from victim to architect. He began to visualize the airfield, the layout, the hangars. "We can," Natalie agreed. "But we need a plan. Tobias is with them. He's heavy muscle." "Tobias is a mercenary," Harrison said. "He flipped on me for money. He'll flip on them if the odds change." "And how do we change the odds?" Harrison looked at the car wash sprayer. Then he looked at the chemical drums, stored in the corner of the bay. "I'm an architect, Natalie," Harrison said, his eyes cold. "I know how things are built, and I know how to take them apart. We're going to the airfield, but we're not going to fight them with guns." "With what, then?" Harrison picked up the burner phone. It was miraculously still working. "With the truth," Harrison said, "and a little bit of structural sabotage." He dialed 911. "Emergency," the operator said. "My name is Harrison West," he said clearly. "I'm currently being pursued by the individuals responsible for the murder of Julian St. Clair, or rather the man pretending to be him. I'm heading to the executive airfield in Wheeling. If you want to catch a ghost, send the SWAT team to Hangar 4. He hung up and looked at Natalie. "You called the cops on yourself?" she asked, incredulous. "I called the cavalry," Harrison said. "Now let's drive." The executive airfield was quiet, a flat expanse of concrete under a moonless sky. Hangar 4 was a private luxury hangar, usually reserved for corporate jets. Harrison and Natalie ditched the Corolla in a drainage ditch a mile away and approached on foot, cutting through the perimeter fence with wire cutters Natalie had in the trunk. They crouched behind a fuel truck, watching the hangar. A sleek Gulfstream jet sat on the tarmac engines, idling the whine, piercing the night air. A black SUV pulled up to the stairs. The doors opened. Julian stepped out, clutching a silver briefcase to his chest, like a child holding a teddy bear. Lorelei followed, looking impeccable, even in flight gear, her hair tied back in a silk scarf. Tobias brought up the rear, scanning the perimeter with his weapon drawn. "There's the bag," Natalie whispered. "Wait," Harrison cautioned. He watched them ascend the stairs. He knew the layout of this hangar. He had designed the renovation 2 years ago. He knew that the fuel pumps were automated. He knew the fire suppression system was top of the line, halon gas designed to suck the oxygen out of the room instantly to kill a fire. And he knew where the manual override was. "Go to the power box on the north wall," Harrison whispered to Natalie. "When I signal, cut the lights to the runway." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to ground their flight." Natalie sprinted into the darkness. Harrison moved toward the hangar control panel, located on the exterior wall. He waited until Julian and Lorelei were inside the plane. Tobias was standing at the bottom of the stairs, talking to the pilot. Harrison punched the code into the control panel. He hadn't changed the master override code since the renovation. 12345. Architects are lazy with their own passwords. The panel beeped green. Harrison hit the button labeled Emergency Fire Suppression. Interior. Inside the hangar, sirens began to wail. But not just sirens. High-pressure nozzles in the ceiling burst open, flooding the hangar with chemical foam. Simultaneously, the halon gas system inside the hangar, which shouldn't have affected the plane but caused chaos, triggered the alarms. Tobias spun around, confused by the sudden noise and the white foam raining down. "Now, Natalie!" Harrison yelled, though she couldn't hear him. The runway lights died. The entire airfield went pitch black. The pilot of the Gulfstream panicked. He couldn't take off in zero visibility, with alarms blaring. He cut the engines. The door of the plane opened. Julian stood there, screaming into the darkness. "What is happening?" "Get us in the air." "We can't," the pilot yelled back. Harrison stepped out from behind the fuel truck. He walked into the pool of light coming from the plane's open door. "Going somewhere, Julian," he called out. Julian froze. He squinted into the darkness. "Harrison, you can't kill a man who built the stage you're standing on," Harrison said, walking closer. He held his hands up, showing he was unarmed. "Shoot him!" Julian shrieked at Tobias. Tobias raised his gun. But suddenly, floodlights blinded them all. From the perimeter of the airfield, a dozen armored vehicles roared onto the tarmac. A megaphone crackled. "Federal agents, drop your weapons, get on the ground." Harrison hadn't just called the local police. He had called the FBI contact he had worked with on the Federal Reserve Building project years ago. He had texted the photos of dead Julian St. Clair to him during the drive. Tobias didn't hesitate. He dropped his gun and raised his hands. He knew when a job was over. Lorelei stood in the doorway of the plane, looking at the swarm of agents. She looked at Harrison. For the first time, her mask cracked. She looked old. She looked terrified. Julian, however, was not rational. "No," he screamed. "It's mine. It's all mine." He grabbed the silver briefcase and jumped from the stairs, landing awkwardly on the tarmac. He began to run, clutching the money, sprinting blindly toward the dark fields. "Stop!" an agent yelled. Julian didn't stop. He pulled a small pistol from his waistband and fired wildly behind him. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 3 agents returned fire. Julian St. Clair stumbled. The briefcase flew from his hand, bursting open as it hit the ground. Diamonds and bearer bonds spilled out onto the oil-stained concrete, sparkling under the harsh tactical lights. Julian fell face first into the pile of wealth he had died to acquire and died again to keep. This time he didn't get up. Lorelei screamed a sound of pure, unadulterated loss, not for her brother, but for the end of her world. Agents swarmed the stairs, cuffing her. Harrison stood still as the chaos swirled around him. An agent approached him, gun lowered. "Harrison West." "That's me," Harrison said, his voice hollow. "We have a witness securing the scene who claims you saved her life. Natalie Vane." Harrison looked over toward the fence. Natalie was there, wrapped in a blanket, talking to an agent. She caught his eye and gave him a small, sad salute. "She's telling the truth," Harrison said, "about everything." 6 months later. The coastal town of San Sebastian in Spain was a long way from Chicago. The air smelled of salt and grilled fish, not exhaust and desperation. Harrison sat at a small cafe table overlooking the bay. He had a sketchbook open, drawing the curve of the ancient wall. He wasn't Harrison West, the tycoon architect, anymore. He was just Harry, a consultant for a small restoration firm. He had lost the firm. The scandal of the St. Clair fraud had dissolved West and Associates. The assets were seized, the reputation ruined. But he didn't care. He had kept his freedom. He had testified against Lorelei, who was now serving 20 years in a federal penitentiary. A waiter approached his table. "Senor, a package for you." Harrison looked up. It was a small brown envelope. No return address. He opened it. Inside was a single diamond earring, the teardrop shape, the vintage platinum setting, and a note. Sold the other one. Bought a bar in Key West. Figured you earned this one back. Don't build any more glass houses, Harry. They shatter too easily. Harrison held the diamond up to the sunlight. It refracted the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. It was real. Lorelei had hidden the real ones, and somehow Natalie had found them before the feds swept the evidence room. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He closed his fist around the diamond, then put it in his pocket. He picked up his pencil and turned to a fresh page. He began to draw. Not a skyscraper, not a monument. He drew a small house, with a solid foundation and no secrets. What a ride from the heights of Chicago's skyline to the gritty underworld of the docks. Harrison West learned that the strongest structures aren't made of steel. They're made of truth. He lost his fortune, but he regained his soul. Lorelei and Julian thought they could design the perfect crime, but they forgot one thing. You never corner an architect who knows how to bring the house down. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, smash that. Like button, it really helps the channel grow. And if you want more twisted tales of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you found those earrings? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.